pursuit of the truth is the fundamental endeavor of mankind. The truth, whether it's for knowledge, enlightenment, or even love. The truth is the only thing that allows us to ensure our azimuth remains true and our destination assured. It is my experience that the success of any journey relies on the people who are along for the trip. As with every expedition, each person plays a critical role and serves a purpose on that trip. And yes, that includes healthy skepticism and even dissenting views and opinions. Only with all views and voices heard will we be able to plot a course that represents the best chance of our success for reaching far-off shores. So, I say to you, here and now, let's not be afraid to ask the hard questions or challenge the words of our experts. Let's not be shy to own our passion and push the boundaries of our horizon. In conclusion, thank you for your courage and your time and your audience today. You are the true heroes and the ones who deserve awards. Thank you again. My first involvement with the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program began back in 2008. The former program manager at the time was looking for somebody to provide dedicated counterintelligence support to the effort, which I wasn't aware of at the time. And so in 2008, a couple folks came to my office and they asked to have a conversation with me. And usually as a Fed in our line of work, when strange people come to your door and they want to talk to you, it's usually not a good thing. In this particular case, we had several meetings. They asked me a little bit about my background. And after the third meeting, I was introduced to the program manager. And at that point, it became apparent to me why they were asking me the questions they were asking me. And so in 2008, I was asked to come on board. I did, and I worked for the former program manager at the time. And in 2010, upon his departure, I was asked to take over the program formally as the director. My personal experience with Mr. Bigelow has been nothing but unbelievable. A complete privilege and honor to work with such a titanic force in the aerospace industry. Mr. Bigelow is not only a commensurate professional, he is also a true gentleman. I found working with Mr. Bigelow's folks, all his folks, to be extremely rewarding. These individuals are truly some of the best that we have, working in areas that very few individuals have really any understanding of the complexity involved. You're talking about putting space vehicles in orbit around Earth and potentially around the moon. And so anytime you have an opportunity to work with individuals like that, it's always a privilege and an honor. ATIP received its cases from various different channels. So where our office sat at the top of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, we had multiple avenues of approach. So you had, in some cases, reporting would come up through Navy channels. In other cases, it would come up through Air Force channels. In other cases, it would come through the intelligence community. And as the single focal point, if you will, for this capability, all roads, I guess, lead to Rome. In this particular case, all roads led to our office regarding the phenomena. So ATIP did continued in earnest after 2012. An additional tranche of funding was provided to our organization. Unfortunately, the congressional verbiage was a little bit vague, and so the funding was diverted to another office, but the funding was intended for us. So it was supposed to go from 2013 to 2014, and then at that point, fiscal constraints became increasingly tight within the department, and we were forced to do more with less, or in some cases, more with nothing. So we very quickly continued our efforts, and we started to dual use a lot of what we were doing. So As an example, one may be interested in putting out a requirement looking for, let's say, advanced ICBM technology, right? So you would go out and you would ask folks, I want you to be able to give me a paper that helps me understand anything coming into Earth's orbit with these particular profiles. So, you know, hypersonic velocities, low observability, etc. And what might be useful for, let's say, identifying North Korean ICBM missiles coming into continental United States could also be useful in identifying other objects, things that are coming in with that same flight pattern, but not necessarily a ballistic missile. So we got very clever at dual using, and the reporting continued to come in through our office. And quite frankly, the program never went away. So we just became very clever, as everybody else in the department, of having to manage our resources, I think, in an increasingly constrictive way that still allowed us to obtain the data we were trying to obtain, but in the same respect, not require additional resources to come in for new projects. So I guess in short, in lay terms, we got very clever at managing our money and our time and our resources. We learned to confederate a lot more. So rather than us shouldering the burden of everything, we learned to leverage our partners in the intelligence community and within the services to help us do a lot of the functions that we were trying to do in-house. No, there was no trick, and there was no false pretense. The videos were released in accordance with the strict manner that DoD prescribes to DoD manuals and regulations involving the release of information. It went through the official DOPSR process, and then furthermore, an additional step was taken to have the videos reviewed by foreign disclosure representatives. In fact, the most senior foreign disclosure representatives in the department. And ultimately it required OCA, or Original Classification Authority, approval and review to release the video. So in essence, I didn't release anything. The Department of Defense released those videos. The documentation is held by the Department of Defense, and the justification for releasing those videos were exactly as stated. And that was to create an unclassified database that people could then access and try to help us identify the signatures we were seeing. I suspect we will always get more information as people with additional expertise and experience and backgrounds continue to look at the videos, and not just Gimbal, I think any and all videos, we will begin to put together more pieces of the puzzle. There are experts, I would submit now, that are out there, perhaps within this audience that is watching this video now, that have the ability to look at some of these videos and help us have a better understanding of what exactly we're looking at. I think it's important to understand that what people chalk up as atmospheric anomalies or FLIR phenomena resulting from infrared glare, I think it's important that the audience understand that we already have the equipment when this information is being collected, we can already ascertain very, very quickly whether or not this is infrared glare, heat glare, or an atmospheric disturbance. I think it's important to know that you can't get a radar lock on an atmospheric disturbance. I think it's important to recognize that we have already the technology that will tell us very, very quickly if something is simply FLIR fuzz or IR haze, if you will. So these things are certainly beyond our understanding at this point, but it is not, as some have stated, just some sort of atmospheric anomaly or reflection that we're seeing. So videos can be short for many reasons, just like audio or anything else. Keeping in mind there's a legal requirement to protect sources and methods within the U.S. government and classified information, and even some unclassified information that remains sensitive. So it is important to note that if someone is looking at a video, it is highly probable that the portion you're watching is what has been cleared for public dissemination and release. but there may be portions of audio following that, immediately following that clip, that gets into classified sources and methods. Perhaps it starts talking about the operating AOR at the time that the film was taken, or by precise capabilities and technologies that the U.S. government would want to, understandably want to protect. So a lot of these videos and audios and things that people are seeing are short because of the fact that it's quite possible the government's protecting sources and methods, plain and simple. My decision to leave the U.S. government was before I ever knew anything about To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. My initial plan was to frankly fade off into the sunset, take a job working something that I could enjoy that was completely unrelated to the U.S. government, if you will, like I said, fade off into the sunset. It was actually the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science that found me. Through some colleagues of mine in the intelligence community, once they found out that I was leaving, had suggested that maybe I should talk to some of the folks at To the Stars who were interested in talking to me. I can't answer on behalf of the masses. I sure hope so. Sad to say that I've been doing this for long enough where we have a lot of compelling information and data and documentation, eyewitness testimony, and there is still, for some reason, this hesitation, this blockage that prevents people from having an open and honest dialogue and conversation about the phenomena. And I think, from my perspective, that's actually more troubling than the phenomena itself. So, one short statement: the best way to not get scoffed at and ridiculed is not to have the conversation, sadly enough. That's the truth. However, cowardice will never get us where we need to go. So we have to have the conversation. I think the best way to have the conversation is having it where we allow the science and the data to speak for itself. Opinions, suppositions, things of that nature aren't overly helpful. In the end, it doesn't matter what me, Luis Elizondo, thinks. What matters is what the data says, and then you formulate your own opinion. And I think that is the strength. And when we're using the scientific method, it is imperative that we strictly adhere to those rules. Because ultimately, in the end, the data is going to speak for itself, and it doesn't really matter what I think. What matters is what you think based upon the data. So the easiest way to have the conversation: let the data speak for itself. Sometimes data, the truth, sometimes she whispers, and sometimes you have to really listen hard. But if you listen carefully, you can hear what she has to say. And that was my job for the last 10 years. First of all, I was never released from any non-disclosure agreement between me and the U.S. government. In fact, I still maintain a security clearance, or at least I think I do. And so I'm obligated to protect classified information, at which point until the information becomes unclassified or I die. So I have not been released from any non-disclosure agreement, and I am legally bound by those. And so that's why sometimes when I'm asked questions, what may come across as being vague or in general terms a bit evasive, it's not on purpose. The problem is I'm legally bound to protect that information. And so, in short, no, I haven't been relieved of that obligation at all. I think it's more than a possibility. I think it's an imperative. That conversation needs to occur between the American people and our lawmakers. And if the American people insist on it, then it'll happen. I think it's a matter of time. I'm not sure we can put, at this point, the cat back in the bag. I think the conversation has already been started, and I think it's inevitable. At least that's my hope. Well, I was hired to be the director of security, global security and special programs. So right now it's pretty simple. My job is to protect people, places, and things. So as any person in the security realm is aware of, it's a pretty basic function. I think it's very important. Keeping in mind that this is not just a function where we're worried about traditional acts of crime, someone stealing something or something like that. There is potentially some counterintelligence perspective to this. There is some there's personnel security. There's a whole spectrum of issues and things that we need to, I think, we need to keep a handle on, especially if this company is going to grow, which hopefully it does. Those equities that the company have will have to continue to be protected. I would say remain skeptical. Healthy skepticism is very important. In fact, it's imperative. In fact, in my job as an intelligence officer, I was paid to be skeptical. I think you should always question all the information that comes before you by anybody who says anything. And I think that's true not just with people like me, I think it's true with government, religion, and everything in between. However, in this particular perspective, I don't really care if you believe me. That's not my intent. My intent is for you to listen to the data and look at the data yourself and allow you to come to that conclusion. In the end, it doesn't matter if you believe me or not. What matters is if you have access to the data, then you can formulate your own opinion. The one thing I've learned long ago as an intelligence officer is that I could be absolutely sure of something, absolutely certain of something, and I can still be absolutely wrong. So in the end, those of you who are healthy skeptics, remain skeptical. I think you need to ask the hard questions, continue to push the boundaries, because that's how we find the truth. The truth has nothing to fear. So if you don't believe something, then keep asking the question, keep doing the research, keep demanding the data, and hopefully you then can come to the same conclusion that some of us came to. So let's look at the term extraterrestrial. I don't like to use that term very much, but in a definitive way, when you look at the definition of extraterrestrial, it just means beyond terra firma, beyond terrestrial, beyond this thing that we call Earth. The question is, do they come from outer space, inner space, or the space in between? I don't know. I have my own personal opinions about it, but it would be very misleading to give you those opinions, because in the end we don't have enough data. It would be great if we could point our finger and say, it was the Russians or the Chinese or someone else. The problem is that the data that we've been seeing for a while, and it's so advanced that by now it is hard enough for us now to replicate our observations with our understanding of quantum mechanics. But for this type of technology to be available when we first started seeing it, I think is beyond improbable. I'm not going to say impossible, but it is really, really, really unlikely. So that leads then to the next question. Well, if it's not ours and it's not theirs, then whose is it? I don't know whose it is. That's why we're asking the hard questions. That's why we did what we did for the last 10 years, and why we need to continue doing what we're doing, because we need to ask those questions. We don't know whose they belong to. We don't know who they are or what they are, but we know that they're real. So I would submit to you that because of that, we need to continue to explore. We need to continue asking the hard questions. It's important to know that the U.S. government has a responsibility to protect classified information and sensitive information, to include sources and methods, by law. So oftentimes when you see information before you, you are looking at a snapshot in time, under a very particular set of circumstances. Keeping in mind the information that may have come before that or after that could be very classified. It could discuss things, for example, of who took the footage, or under what circumstances. Were they in combat? Was it in peacetime? Was it an exercise? Things that would give away are what we call tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTP in the Department of Defense and in the intelligence community. So to protect that information from getting in the wrong hands, what you are seeing is information that has been deemed by the department to be unclassified, and that way everybody can look at it. What comes before that or after that, I can't discuss that. I'm not at liberty to discuss that because, frankly, that's the government's call to make that determination, not mine. The chain of custody documentation is the province of the Department of Defense. I think it is. If anybody wanted to see it, it would be up to the Department of Defense to release it. It is a DoD form. It is not classified. So but unfortunately, as a DoD form, you have to go through DoD to ask for a copy of it. Now that I'm in the private sector, my intent is to push the envelope as hard and as fast as I can. I know what I've been privy to, and I think we need to have the information available so the American people can have the discussion amongst themselves and with our lawmakers, and then make a determination if it should be a national security imperative. That shouldn't be a decision that I make. That should be a decision that you make, and then you tell your leadership what you want them to do, and then your government does that. So, no outward aggression, but please allow me a moment to provide you a very a rudimentary analogy. I've used it before, but I think it's fitting. So, I think most people, not all, but most people would agree that locking your front door is probably a good idea to do before you go to bed at night. So most people do. And it's not that they expect something bad to happen, but we do it as a precaution. And so imagine every night now you lock your front door, you go ahead and you secure your windows, and you lock your windows, and then right before you go to bed, you go to your keypad, you punch in your keypad, and now your house, the alarm is armed, and everything is secure. But for some reason, every morning you wake up, you go downstairs to have your coffee, you look in your living room, and there's muddy boot prints in your living room, and they're not your boot prints. Now, nothing's been taken from your house, no one's been injured or harmed, and nothing is out of place. And yet, here you go every night, locking your front doors, you secure your windows, and you turn on your alarm, and yet still these muddy boot prints continue to show up day after day. So the question is, how do they get there? The question is it a threat? Well, I think you have to presume it could be a threat until you're sure it's not a threat. And that was my job when I was in the Department of Defense, was to make sure things were not a threat. And until I could prove they were not, I had to make the presumption that they could be. Well, I think in the past we had just that. You had talking heads. You had people that had political motivations for one reason or another. Some of them had political allegiances. My organization, when I was in the Department of Defense, were apolitical. We didn't care if you were Democrat, Republican, Independent, or anything in between. Our job, our loyalty was to the American people. That's who we took an oath to defend. Keeping in mind all of us, whether military or national security, took an oath to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that's exactly what we did. And to this point, even after I left government, I've never been officially relieved of that responsibility. So is this some massive effort for misinformation? If it is, it's probably the worst effort to do so, because there would be holes all in it. I think as for my motivation to come out, I gave everything to do this. I gave up a fantastic job. I was at the top of my career, doing very well financially, had a great 401k plan, great benefits, pension, everything. It's easy to sit back and armchair quarterback and on a weekend go through blogs and say this or that or this or that. Another thing is to give up every single thing you have going to pursue this in order to have the conversation with the American people. This, I can tell you, was not a financially good decision for me. It was not a good decision in anyway, because I've spent my entire career living in the shadows. In fact, to some degree, my survival depended on it. Coming out in this way, if anybody were to ask me my opinion, I would say this is the last thing you'd ever want to do. But at the end of the day, I believe in what I'm doing. I believe it is the right thing to do. And if albeit for nothing, for us to have the conversation, at least have the conversation now, where we can do it and you can hold your heads up high and not worried about the social stigma that's attached to this and the labels that have been given to you, then I think I've accomplished my mission. Oh my goodness. I think I'm going to have to leave that question to some of our smarter folks in the organization, some of our scientists, some of the folks like Steve Justice and Hal Puthoff, and some of the folks out there who have probably forgotten more about physics than I'll ever know. As far as releasing that type of data and those type of theoretical arguments, that's not really my forte. And the problem is if I tried to pretend to be that person, I would probably do a terrible job at it. So I'm going to leave that question to far smarter people than myself, and hopefully they can give you a better answer than I can. Well, that's what we're trying to do. I think before you share any information, we first need to make sure, we need to ensure the veracity and the validity of the information is what it is. The last thing you ever want to do, and you would reinforce the whole misinformation campaign notion, if we put out information prematurely that has not met a rigorous standard of the way we look at information, then we would actually be doing a disservice to you and everybody else. When we were in ATIP, we applied the same level of rigor to these incidences, investigating these incidents, as we would to any other type of investigation, espionage, or terrorism investigation. And I think you need to have that level of scrutiny when you're doing this type of thing to make sure that the data is real and it's pure. Because what we don't want to do is get into a situation where we either inadvertently or on purpose mislead anybody. We have to make sure that we preserve the integrity of the information to the very best of our ability. So sometimes it's not necessarily on the timeline we like, but our hope is to get it out there eventually in a way that is clear, makes sense, and preserves, again, the data in a way that anybody could look at if this was a court of law and say, yes, that information has been preserved according to the way it should be preserved. Wow, so people are going to hate me for answering this way. I have deliberately for the last 10 years not read any books, any blogs, any movies, anything related to UFOs. I've done that on purpose, not because I don't like anything about it. It's because, as I understand it from a scientific perspective and as an investigator, I want to, if you will, sequester the jury. I want to preserve the information the best I can, and if that means ensuring I don't have any type of subconscious thought about something because I may have read an article where now all of a sudden subconsciously there's this idea or notion in my head that will then cloud my judgment of looking at the data that I'm looking at. So in order to protect myself from even being tempted to have some sort of conclusion before I have the data, I have purposely steered away from reading books. And it's not that they're not good books and they're not worth reading. I am absolutely certain they are. And now that I'm out, I plan to do so. But it was critically important for me to make sure I remain as unbiased and objective as possible while collecting and processing this data with my colleagues. And so for that reason, I avoided as much as possible trying to read anything that could somehow bias my approach. Well, because I think alien means a lot of things to a lot of different people. We're here in San Diego, and right now people are trying to build a wall to keep out aliens. So, I hesitate to use aliens because what does that mean? Alien just simply means something not from here. So by definition, there's a lot of aliens that we have. I prefer to keep it without labels for that exact reason, because I think we prejudice. If we say aliens, we immediately assume outer space or out there, and when we could be talking about inner space, or as I said before, the space in between. The bottom line is we just don't know. And by putting a label on something, I think we prematurely prejudice the jury and our objectivity when we're talking about this subject. So that is why I haven't used the term aliens, because I'm not sure that's even accurate, because we truly don't know what's behind the wheel, or at least I don't. And so for that reason, I'm not going to speculate. I would say these videos have been pulled off of U.S. government systems, and they are absolutely indeed from pilots on U.S. military platforms and capabilities. I will tell you, in stressful situations, whether it's a combat situation or not, sometimes radio discipline goes out the window. I've been guilty of it myself. Stress does things to individuals. It does different things. I think if one were to ask Commander Fravor or any of his colleagues if they ever talk like that, they'd probably tell you yes. I'm not going to answer on their behalf, but they will absolutely talk like that. And that's just, unfortunately, the way sometimes stress, we react to it as human beings. So I attended the University of Miami. Probably spent less time studying than I should have. But I realized very quickly after nearing the end of my education there that I wanted to serve my country. And I wanted to serve my country in a way that I could use some of my education in microbiology, immunology, and parasitology in a productive way. So I joined the United States Army, and best decision of my life. Hardest decision of my life, but the best decision. And I quickly realized, initially I wanted to go in and do some sort of biomedical intelligence, perhaps maybe dealing with WMD. But after I came into the Army, I realized that my true passion lied in the intelligence discipline writ large. It was less the medical side of it, and it was just intelligence. To me, intelligence was awful lot like playing a game of chess against an enemy you may never see. And so to me, that was very intriguing. Well, classified information, no. I don't think we'll ever get classified information released. I think you can get classified information declassified, and once that information is declassified, then absolutely it can be released. But the government is usually not in the habit of releasing classified information. So if the expectation is for people that classified information is going to be revealed, I think they're going to be sadly disappointed. But on the good side of it, I think that there's plenty of opportunity to have information that may be sensitive or considered classified now, have that information stripped of sources and methods, and have it downgraded and declassified. And yes, I do. I think the intelligence community does this all the time. In fact, I know they do. And I think this is something that can be done in this area no differently than anything else. Look what just came out recently with the papers on the Kennedy assassination, et cetera. So it is possible, and I think it's certainly within the realm of reality. And if you ask me, I would certainly champion that effort myself. I think we need to engage our leaders. I think we need to engage those individuals who we put in office to represent us and our equities and our interests. And we need to let them know it's okay to have the conversation. It's okay to support things like Harry Reid and Senator Stevens and Inouye did, and have the courage to ask the hard questions and pursue doggedly the things that we don't understand. In fact, I think that is one of our sacred missions as mankind, is to pursue those deep, dark recesses that we have a hard time understanding and a hard time reaching. I think it's in our nature, I think it's in our spirit, and I think it's in our DNA. And so I would encourage everybody to reach out to their elected officials and keep asking the hard questions. Insist that the truth be made public.